I think today's show has a decidedly magazine-y feel, made-up word, in that I have three guests for you with very different stories. And sandwiched in between, nearly, from the mailbag, I thought we'd go for some spooky feedback from last week's show when I talked to the spiritualist photographer, author, and in many ways, I suppose, investigator when you consider her work around the world, photographing for and writing her book, Séance. Some interesting feedback from you and some stories to match following last week's show. But in terms of guests today, 3 stories, 3 interviews, featuring, well, firstly, a writer called Melissa Berman, who is the custodian of a photographic find that we've mentioned on the show before. I don't think I was jumping the Watsits when I suggested that this felt to me like a Vivian Maier kind of find. Brooklyn-born and a Manhattan mainstay, Ernie Stone lived, breathed and photographically captured New York in its most defining decades. He was a top radio DJ in the 50s, a television and off-Broadway performer, a self-taught photographer. He chronicled a city on the edge of change, its politics, its protests. His solo 1975 exhibition, which we talk about within our conversation today, not with Ernie, with Melissa, New York A to Z, offered a glimpse into his vast archive, a collection that remains largely unseen until now, until his niece, Melissa Berman, was given the opportunity by the late Ernie Stone to share his work with the world. So that's Melissa. Then Rick Davy, who will talk about a project called A Day in the Life of, and those ofs are very important because they all live close to Rick in a beautiful part of the UK called Cornwall. The ofs include gunsmiths, landscape artists, carvers, Spanish guitar makers, an organic pasta maker. You get the drift. But what can I tell you about Rick? 27 words, actually, is what I can tell you about Rick from his bio. The only 27 words there are. Just a bloke with a load of film cameras, a fridge full of film, and a love of all things real. Film, that is. No digi here. What I absolutely love about his project, and what I hope will be inspirational to you, is the fact that what he does, the body of work that he's built up, is proof that gold is right there on our doorsteps in the form of people with stories. And then also today, Lynn Fraser, who only went to one Amateur Photographer of the Year, so she did, which popped up in my inbox one morning just a short while ago as a complete surprise, so much so, if I'd have been eating cornflakes, I'd have redecorated the walls. Nice image, Neil, nice image. But I am actually so excited because thousands of photographers and thousands and thousands and thousands more photographs were entered. So it's not like just a little competition in terms of the amount of photographers you'd find yourself up against. It's, well, imagine this. I equated it to the famous London Palladium, the world-famous London Palladium. A theatre that's hosted Sinatra and the Beatles and Madonna, loads of royal variety shows. If you filled every single one of those seats in that theatre, that's how many people there are. And Lynn's seat is the winning seat. Lynn Fraser's website is called My Journey with a Camera. And oh, what a camera. And oh, what a journey. I'm actually quite proud to say that I've been on some of that journey. Not a lot of it, but a bit of it, watching her work. So inspirational stuff today from Lynn, who recounts the stories of the pictures that won her this award and parts with some super advice as well. So there we go. One legend from New York City, photo stories about people in Cornwall, and an award winner with a well-stamped passport, plus some ghost stories. Sounds good to me.
Today on the Photo Walk.
He was my hero. He still is my hero. Those are the best days of my childhood, are the days that I spent walking the streets of New York with my uncle.
I think you get the better portrait out of anybody if you've engaged with them. The shoulders drop. You've got a one-to-one relationship.
I never expect to win. I don't enter thinking I'm going to win. For me, it gets my images off the hard drive.
Not only is it a capsule of a time, and certainly he was capturing a very iconic time in New York's history, but it's a vision of a time.
You know, being asked to, or being invited, I should say, into their world, it's really quite humbling.
Just go out and play. Just see what lights your fire.
Lynn Fraser, Melissa Berman and Rick Davy. As I say, a magazine-y feel today for the photo walk, and hopefully much to look up, much to find inspiration from. It'll be a busy show page. Welcome along as we make our photo walks together then. A show where we walk and make pictures photographically, sketchbooking our time together each week. Accompanied by the letters and inspirational stories you've sent in, plus talking with special guests from around the world. I'll take a peek into the mailbag in a moment for a flavour of today's letters we have, but before that, thank you to those who believe in the podcast enough that you're now Patreon members, or Extra Milers, as you're specially known. And to mpb.com, who have sponsored this show for a while now. A service I use for buying, selling and trading used camera gear is MPB. As a website platform, mpb.com is the place where I can safely buy, sell and trade quality used photo and video gear online. And online guarantees make this a place I feel safe to buy from, unlike some other marketplaces. Here's how it works. You go online to mpb.com and search for gear that you'd like to add to your kit bag. Or if you're selling gear you no longer need, click the button at the top of the website that says Start Selling and Trading and just follow the very easy instructions. From there, you print off a packing label, stick it on the box with all your gear in it. It's collected by a courier free of charge from your front door. And the best bit, MPB pays you for your camera gear within days. So join me in the hundreds of thousands of photographers every year in the US, Europe and the UK who know that MPB is the place to buy, sell, trade and create. Right on the show today, Per Birkhaug at 4:03. It's important, it's precise. 4:03 was visited in the night by something. What that thing is, we don't know. But he has the story in a moment. That show last week about things that go bump in the night obviously stirred some memories, because it turns out Bob of the Desert, one of our extra milers too, has stories of odd stuff happening that he can't quite explain. There's a look ahead to 3 specials, and you have one more week to join in with our February assignment. Right, shall we walk? Checklist out. Coffee, check. Garibaldi's, check. Walking boots, check. Have you got some spare film or an extra SD card just in case? Check. And a notebook for all the good advice today. Let's walk. Oh, I'm getting very, very excited about the forthcoming Indian adventure. This time next week it all starts. It's airport day, as in arrivals at Delhi. I'll have been there a few days, acclimatising and meeting a few folk. Flying in on Air Canada, I am, on one of their fancy Dreamliners. Oh yes, I did actually check the menu. And I see, obviously, it being proudly Canadian, everything seems to come with maple syrup. Tea, sir? Oh, yes, please. Maple syrup with that? Oh, why not? What's for lunch? Oh, I think you'll like this, sir. Chicken, leek pie with maple syrup, followed by a chocolate torte with maple syrup on the side. Then coffee with maple? Yes, of course. And then cheese on a cracker with accompanying maple syrup. Beautiful. It would not surprise me at all if the plane is actually fueled by the stuff. But yes, I'm looking for... I've never flown Air Canada before. I'm flying with Jason Florio, who's working with me on this particular adventure in India. I've moved us as far up the plane as I could possibly do. We might have to work for our voyage. Who knows? Right, letters. Let's have some feedback from the mailbag about last week's show, shall we? This one is from our man of science. Oh yes, Per Birkhaug, one of our very esteemed extra milers. Neil, I just listened to the episode with Shannon Taggart on spiritualism and photography. Well, I have a story for you. Let me start by saying I'm in no way a believer. If anything, I'm a skeptic rationalist, which sounds like a political party, Per. This, says Per, probably excludes me from some joyful experiences, but that's just how it is. Probably as a result of being both a former naval officer and presently a clinical psychologist and psychotherapist. Anyway, my story. Quite a few years ago, while still employed in the Navy, I had to attend a meeting in Stavanger. And since my hometown then and now is Bergen, it meant an overnight stay at a hotel. I had a modest dinner, no alcohol, important part of the story, went to my room, watched some telly, and took an early night. This particular part of the hotel was an adjacent building to the hotel proper, if you will. They were connected, but this building was obviously much, much older. Alarm bells are beginning to ring than the hotel itself. Even if some work had been done to bring the facilities up to modern standards, it was still apparent this is an old building. Bit out of alignment here and there. Quite a charming piece of architecture, though. Anyway, in the night, at precisely 4:03, I awoke. Per, do you document all your precise timings in life? I know the time exactly because I looked straight at the telly and the time was shown on the TV's clock in bright red digits. That'll be the reason. And I wonder why I woke up all of a sudden. And that's when I felt it. The distinct feeling of a hand moving up over my chest to warm my throat. I can tell you, nobody ever vacated a bed as fast as I did that night. I found the light switch in an equal hurry. Then my first thought was, maybe it's a mouse. What a strange way to think. I'm not sure that's the first thing that I'd have thought of, Per. I wouldn't have been thinking, it could have been a mouse, I suppose. Given it was an old building, maybe. So I shook the duvet vigorously, nothing. I checked under the bed, I wouldn't have done that. For possible openings where a mouse could have entered, nothing. Checked the rest of the room. Still, nothing. All the while with my heart pounding like I just had the workout of my life. After all the searching, which probably didn't last much more than 5 to 10 minutes, I had to conclude I couldn't find a reasonable explanation for this distinct feeling of a hand moving up my chest. Hang on, Per. This isn't turning into a 50 Shades of kind of story, is it? In which case, wrong podcast. Anyway, says Per, I had no doubt that it felt like a hand, fingers slightly spread and moving slightly independently of each other. So there was nothing for it. I went back to bed. Are you mad? I think you'd have found me in the hotel bar. I can tell you I didn't sleep much for the rest of the night. I'm not surprised. To this day, I regret not asking the staff in the morning if they knew of any ghost stories connected to the hotel, or that building in particular. I guess there are more stories out there of people being touched by ghosts, but I don't know of any, and certainly don't personally know of anybody else with similar experiences. Now, being a skeptic rationalist, come the revolution, and having a university education founded in science, I don't think it was a ghost. It was probably a hypnagogic illusion. Now, you can say this two ways, can't you? Is it hypnagogic? Or I think it's hypnagogic illusion. Hypno what, Neil? Hypnagogic, I know. I had to look it up as well. Relating to the state immediately before falling asleep. Although you were asleep. I mean, you weren't falling asleep, you were asleep. It's a hazy, dreamlike phase between wakefulness and sleep, where fleeting images, sounds, and thoughts drift through the mind. Anyway, says Per, why it took exactly that shape and form, I'm not sure. Haven't been able to figure it out, to be honest. Anyway, that's my story of being touched by a ghost. I also picked up on something Shannon said about hallucinogens, enabling us to experience a different world out there by having an effect on our sensory or sensing apparatus. But I must protest, they don't. The world is the same, it's just that we haven't and can't have direct access to it. Think of it like a camera, see, I like a good metaphor or analogy, when it comes to photography that includes cameras. Think of it like a camera, e.g. maybe one of your beloved Fujis. They have, as I understand, different profiles that you can apply, and different profiles make the picture look a little bit different, even when it's the same subject, and probably different from what you saw with your own eyes. But the subject is kind of the same. I see where you're going. So it's not that hallucinogens open a door to another world or anything like that. They merely change the way we're able to experience the world. There. That is the skeptic rationalist's view. And a scientific one as well, I might add. So, Per, I appreciate your thoughts on that. What a story. I did worry for a moment I was going to have to apply the over 18 certificate to that story, but it's okay. It worked out okay. But there is something about hotels, isn't there? Especially the old ones. I've talked about the one I stayed in with my old reprobate buddy Mullins in Switzerland before we shot a wedding there. It was only a couple of months actually before the world went absolutely haywire with a thing that I don't like to mention. You know, we stayed in this hotel, and I took I'm sure I've shared these pictures on the show page before. I took a couple of pictures of the corridor outside Kev's room because he was in the basement, the spooky bit. I had the lovely bit, top floor, looking out over the lake. Absolutely beautiful. Kev had the basement with the rattly pipes and stuff, and the corridor that looked like, you know that scene in The Shining where the lad's cycling along on his trike in the hotel. That's where, by the way, we know this, Neil. I'll tell you anyway, just in case my other listeners forgotten. That's where they invented Steadicam because they were tracking back. They obviously couldn't show any track. So somebody out of, I don't know, bedsteads or something, springs, bed springs, they made up Steadicam. That's where it comes from. There we go, film fact for you. But yeah, that bit where the trike's going along and suddenly he stops and there's the two ghostly girls there. That's what this corridor looked like. So, yeah. I mean, your mind can start to play even more tricks with you when you're convinced that something's a bit weird, can't it? But thank you for your atmospheric stories. Nice one. Like it. So to my first guest this week, you heard of me talk of the story of Ernest Stone about a month, maybe a bit more back, or Uncle Ernie, as he's known to Melissa Berman, this wonderful photographer from New York who was making just the most extraordinary photographs of the streets of New York in a real golden age of photography, really. Anyway, Melissa's been, well, as you're about to find out, handed the responsibility of her uncle's really important historical archive. Ernest Stone's, or Ernie Stone's, vast archive has remained largely undiscovered until now. This is a beautiful time capsule story, and the work is a real statement about NYC, which is, as you're about to discover, attracting attention around the world now. So I'm thrilled. I think we're the first podcast to really be talking about him. This is the story from Melissa about Ernest Stone. Now, I'm going to quote, known to walk miles and miles in New York City every day, camera in hand. Let's start with who he was, where he was born, and then I'll move on to his DJing background. There's quite a few different twists and turns to his life, but let's start with where he was born, and we'll move from there.
Yeah, he was quite the Renaissance man, my uncle. He was born in Flatbush, Brooklyn, to immigrant parents who escaped Russia from persecution. They were Jewish. And he was born and raised in Brooklyn. He was a Brooklyn Dodgers diehard fan. We used to walk to Ebbett Field, later to become a diehard Mets fan. And
did he have an interest in photography from an early age, or were his parents involved in photography?
You know, unfortunately, I can't answer that about his parents. His brother was a composer, and my uncle was he was an actor first. So that was what he did first. He founded an off-Broadway theater company called New Stages, which did, some avant-garde stuff, did Lorca, Sartre, and he was very active as an actor and always interested in the visual arts as well. He was an intellectual, had his nose in all types of philosophy and politics and thinking. And so I think the camera was his way to join all that together and make his expression.
He was also a DJ, wasn't he? A proper New York DJ. Tell me about that side of his career, his life.
He was a DJ, and I don't know if I sent you the photo, but I have the photo of him in front of the WMCA old-fashioned mic. Back then DJs wore a sports coat and tie and smoked cigarettes and
while on air, most of them.
Yeah, I actually have this great photograph of an article where he's interviewing Paul Anka, with cigarette in hand and sport jacket on. He was a WMCA DJ, I think, up until in the late 50s, right up until around 1960, and then he was the announcer for Channel 13, which is the public broadcasting station in New York.
So he was quite the star in your household, wasn't he? Really, in your family.
Oh yeah, he was. I mean, he was a broadcast personality. He was a known name, and he was doing all the cool stuff. He wasn't going to an office every day.
So, a self-taught artist, a devotee to photography. Where do you think this interest for street photography came from? I know I wouldn't describe him just as a street photographer because there's other projects that we're going to talk about. But he definitely enjoyed the street and making photographs and documentaries of America during a certain period, didn't he?
Yeah, I would say, and other people have said the same thing about, just putting him in that pocket of a street photographer. But I would say the street was his canvas. I mean, he, born and bred, he was a walker. He walked everywhere in New York. And he was fascinated by people and by things that were happening in New York. The time that he was shooting was a very transitional time in New York City. And my uncle was, like I said, he was very intellectually curious, involved. So I think while he was walking, he was envisioning ways that those transformations were happening visually, and that was what informed his street photography.
He was fascinated by politics. There's political posters, but actually these are posters that have served their time and have started peeling off the wall. So I was quite intrigued by that.
Yeah, and I think, he later did collage work. So I think if you look at those, it might have been kind of the start of when he started to actually create collages as well. But in New York, anyone who's walked down the streets can see that posters are slapped on top of each other, on top of each other, on top of each other on these wooden boards, and then they start to peel. And so Ernie did a study of that. And when we were looking through the negs and the contact sheets and the photos, one can see that he took that curiosity during his travels, because some of the posters are in Europe. I think there's one that was in Israel, but definitely politics was a passion of his. So I think it all came together in that series.
He had a one-man show at the Rena Gallery in 1975. You'll need to tell me about the Rena Gallery. It's obviously not one that's on my doorstep. And it was a series called NY A to Z. Tell me about the show. Tell me about Rena.
So Rena was a gallery that was near the Guggenheim Museum. I'm told it was a reputable, well-respected gallery. You have to remember, I was a child when this was all taking place. So I know he prepared for that show. I can tell because I have all his notes. And the show was called New York A to Z, or A to Z. And it included a series that he did called New York A to Z, where he found the letters of the alphabet in the landscape of the city in kind of unexpected ways. That was what we just showed, a Perry photo, for the first time since 1975. And he also had the political posters hanging at that show, and a series he did called Doors and Windows.
Well, we'll come back to the show in Paris in a moment's time. It's a fantastic idea. It's such a simple idea, isn't it, as well? Was he a bit of as much as you can remember, I know you spent time with him walking the streets, was he quite an ideas merchant?
Yes, he was, he, like I said, he read a lot, and he was actually, and you can probably see it in his work, he was really funny. He had a really funny, kind of New York sense of humor, and he had a lot of inside jokes with my aunt. And if you look at New York A to Z, you can see that he actually included the ampersand in there, X, yes. Y, and Z. So that's just a little bit of his humor. But yes, it was a great way to sort of hold the statement he was trying to make about the city, I think. And I've been told by people in the art world that it's notable that he did that. He shot and showed that years before Lee Friedlander did his letters to the people. So Ernie had the idea, at least on his own, which is good.
He wasn't really a businessman, was he? He had that show. He was making his work. Despite the fact he worked in radio and he'd been an actor, he wasn't one to shout about his work, was he?
No, he was very humble, and he didn't really like, the business side of probably the entertainment business and certainly the art business. And after he had the show, he just kept working on his art. And I would say, as a young girl walking the streets with him and looking through all his art, that's what I would do when I was at their apartment. I would say, Uncle Ernie, your stuff should be in a gallery. You should have another show. You should have a show. You should be in a museum. Yeah. And he just looked at me and said, that's not why I do it.
Yeah.
And it really wasn't why he did it. He really was, he was fortunate he didn't need to do it for work. He did a couple of commercial projects. My aunt worked in advertising, so I think he got hired to shoot a few ad campaigns, but he wasn't chasing that. He really was chasing whatever was in his mind as an artist. I
love this part of your story. You've just laid reference to it. You'd spend entire days walking with Uncle Ernest. And one part of the day might include time at the Mets. What did he teach you?
Oh, everything, honestly. He was my hero. He still is my hero. And those are the best days of my childhood, are the days that I spent walking the streets of New York with my uncle. Yeah. I would spend the days with him, and they didn't live too far from the Met, so we would walk to the Met. And he taught me, I remember as a little girl, we were looking at some modern art at the Met, and I said, oh, anybody could do that. I could draw that, I don't remember what artist I was looking at. And he said, no, Melissa. And he took me straight to the Picasso section and taught me about learning the rules and then breaking the rules. And he showed me Picasso's progression. And that was that was what he taught me. And, myself as a creative person, he taught me that you have to put in the hard work of doing things until you find your voice. Yeah. And it's not magic, it's work. And also, one thing I remember him saying to me, and this is reference back to his life, he said, look, you might be interested in many different things in your life. And he said, that's okay. He said, if you want to write stories for a while, do that. And then if something else interests you, he said, then go do that. Just follow those impulses. And I don't know where it's gotten me in life, but it surely has been a guiding North Star for me, his philosophy on that.
I love his work for the soft feel of it as much as anything. Simply called Bags. I will put a link on the show page so you can follow this to see exactly what I'm talking about here. It's a collection of bags. He was a collector, wasn't he? He was just a collector of imagery and things that he was curious about. But I'm curious about the bags and why the bags. Or did you ever get to find out?
Yeah, the bags are a very interesting study that he was doing. And the prints are gorgeous. They're on a different kind of paper than his other prints. It's more of a satin finish. And there's a lot of them. And so you could tell he was really working with the printing of them. And there's, it's a still life thing. It's very different than his street photography. But I think, if I was to imagine where he got that from is, he would pick up things on the street when we were walking for his collages. Like he would just see a ticket or like a piece of a paper bag, and he would rip envelopes up at home. And so he was very tactile with these objects. So I don't know, he probably was looking around the apartment and thought, loved the shapes and the colors, and they lend themselves really well to black and white. Yeah. So that's my guess on why he did it.
They're absolutely beautiful pictures. The street work from the archive, though, that's where I keep coming back to. It's not all of New York. Some of it is from his trips further afield. But you can see his cheeky humour, well, not all the way through it, but through many of the pictures, there's definitely his humour here. I love the picture of the chap that's in the, well, it would have been called a manhole cover. Right behind him, there's just the head of some mannequin wearing a safety helmet. It's
such a only in New York moment that he captured. That's one of my favorites too. And yeah, surely that was a definite only in New York kind of a thing. The characters, I mean, the way he caught people, some were humorous, lots of his stuff was humorous, but also very poignant, I think, and very respectful. I felt like he had an eye that gazed on people without trying to make anything of it. He just really was, the quintessential observer.
Well, 1992 sadly brought his photography to an end. I want to talk about how you now are, in charge of the archive and how it gets to Paris as well, to be in Paris Photo. So 1992, tell me what happened and how you eventually ended up being the keeper of this archive.
So in 1992, he passed away in November of 92. And, about 6 to 8 months prior to that, I got the call. I was in California at the time, and I got the call that his cancer had returned. So I quickly moved back to New York so I could be there and spend as much time with him as I could. And what happened was he had cancer that had spread into his bones. So he had a surgery, but he was not able to walk. Right. And he said to me straight up, if I can't walk, I don't want to be here. I mean, he was very clear about it, and not walking meant that he couldn't do his work,
so
basically.
it was linked very much to his photography and not being able to go and do that daily walk. Right.
Yeah, but he did fight and did physical therapy. Unfortunately, the cancer was advanced, but we would spend days in the hospital. I would come there and hang out with my aunt. My aunt was there 24/7. They had an amazing relationship. And I guess about 2 weeks before he died, we were sitting there and he just looked at me and said, Melissa, I'm ready. And I thought, ready for what? Yeah. And then he said, I'm ready to put my work out in the world. And I just was like, are you kidding me? Because I knew what that meant, because he'd always said, that's not why I do it. That's not why I do it. But I mean, I guess one would ask the question, why else does an artist do it? I mean, I don't know. I can't speak for all artists, but he surely at the end of his life wanted to have his work out in the world. And so he left it to me and my aunt when he passed. And when she was still alive, it was difficult. She was too close to really get into the art world and work with it. I think it was too hard for her, though she did try some. And then when she passed away in 2018, everything came to me. And that voice has remained in my head ever since he said it, And so I began this journey to try to realize his wish. And it's been incredible. I mean, not knowing much about it, I'm your average museum goer who knows photography that much. And I certainly don't know anything about the business of that world. But honestly, Neil, it's been incredible how every step of the way, I'm like walking into a forest and then somebody appears who can help me. And it's just continued that way all the way to Perry Photo.
Well, the gallerists were all over it there, weren't they?
Yeah, well, I mean, what happened was the first person I met a lot of people, but I'll tell you this little story. I had the work I was in Montauk and my little cottage, and I had the photos and I was trying to make sense of the series because I didn't know where to start. And I thought, someone's having a little gift fair around holidays. Maybe I'll try to sell some prints, just to put it out in the world. And a friend of mine who works as a photography producer came over to see it and to look at it. And she looked at me, she's Irish, and she's like, oh no, Melissa, you can't do that with this. She's like, that's not what this is. And this is much bigger than that. And you can't do it alone. And her name is Cleo, and I have her voice in my head. So from there, I met people. I met this amazing photographer, Stéphane Sednouy. He's French, and he really connected to my uncle's work. He started to advise me on getting things scanned and how the art world works. And you get a gallery and you do these shows, and these are the shows, and this is how you do everything. I mean, he really was a guardian angel that just a friend of a friend introduced me to, and he took me under his wing. So I got the archive in order. And then another friend I was talking to, and I said, I think I need a gallerist. And he said, well, I'm going to be at a dinner tonight with gallery people. And the next day he called me and said, I spoke to David Little at ICP. I showed him your uncle's stuff on my phone. He wants you to call him. It was just like this. Like, I just mentioned it. I was like driving my car and I'm like, I really need a gallery. And David looked at the work and really was taken with it, invited me to go to Paris with ICP, not this year, but last year, to try to scope out all the different galleries and decide, look and see who would be right for Ernie, and told me how to approach them. And so that's what I did in 23. And I made this little booklet. And the last day of Perry Photo, I went back to the galleries that looked good. And Augusta Edwards, who's based out of London, was who I ended up going with. And she's lovely. And she really is behind the work. She thinks it's a big discovery. She came to New York and looked at the prints and everything, and put up A to Z in Paris just a few months ago. It's all like, when I say it out loud, it's so surreal, because it's like literally my dream was, I wanted him to, he loved Paris, they loved Europe, and obviously you're in such good company there. It's amazing. Yeah. I feel like that was his coming out party in Paris, and there was a very good reaction. That there's a gallery in Germany that's going to include him in a show in September, and I'm talking to other people about other stuff, and a book, which is another thing I have to learn about. I have no idea how you do that, but that's the next project.
Just how vast, Melissa, is this archive? I mean, I'm talking about New York A to Z, political posters, bags, and you can see bits of the archive. But how vast is it? How large is this collection?
Well, there's thousands and thousands of negatives and contact sheets that I have. There's about 800 vintage silver gelatin black and white prints, and then some color prints. Some of the color held up, some of it didn't. And then, Neil, there's about 20,000 color slides that I have not even cracked into. It's just...
It's extraordinary.
I mean, we haven't gone through there's a lot of great imagery in the black and white negs, and there's a lot of images there.
This is a life's work, isn't it? For you now. Uncle Ernie is looking down, smiling, probably thinking, there we go, there's a life's work for you.
Yes, he left me a treasure and a big job.
As you've been working on this what's about to become, I think, massive project, is there any one person in particular I know there's Uncle Ernest, and there's your auntie as well, and there's people that you've met along the way that have enthused about the work. But is there anybody in particular that's been an absolute gem in this process?
Yes, there is. And it is such an unbelievable synchronicity. So I spent time in Montauk in New York, and before I was going to Paris the first time, a friend introduced me to Flo Lunn, and Flo's father was Harry Lunn, who anybody listening to this will probably know, because he basically was the guy who created the fine art photography market. He was a dealer. He discovered Ansel Adams at Maplethorpe. He was a big deal in photography. And Flo has his collection, and she happens to be in Montauk. It's a tiny little town in New York where I was. So they sent Flo some of the photos, and she called me up and she said, oh, this is very appealing. Let's meet for coffee. And we met for coffee, and she said, Melissa, you have a treasure here. And she said, I would love to work with you on this and help you. And she is from Paris originally. So she was in Paris and showed me all the different galleries, told me which ones. But Flo and I I took a year off from work, and a friend of mine gave me their house to stay in. I mean, it was a big, she's like, let's do this. And Flo came over every single day And we went through all the prints through the archive. We sleeved them. We put them into series. She's basically my angel and my partner in this.
Wonderful.
And she's advised me every step of the way. And I think she's like Ernie's adopted niece at this point. But how unbelievable that somebody with that knowledge and passion for work and inside of that world just happened to be down the street from me in Montauk and has become, a part of this project.
I think it's an incredible story, and it seems to be gaining momentum, which is I feel like I'm almost in there at the start of this story because we spoke about this and we almost bumped into each other in Paris by a couple of days. I'd left before you arrived, which is such a shame. But it is gaining momentum, and the fact that you've got gallerists in London that's prepared to come to New York to see the work, and then it's working with ICP, and it's incredible. It feels, I'm going to draw a comparison, and it might seem just a little bit too obvious because there are other stories like it, but I am going to draw some kind of comparison to the Vivian Maier story, where Vivian's pictures were found quite by chance. I know yours is not a quite by chance thing. It's but all the same, as it starts to get out into the world, it was little bit by little bit, and then poof, and that feels to me what's happening here.
Oh, Neil, from your mouth, I hope you're right. I mean, that's the hope. And really, a number of people have made that comparison, not so much about the work, but the story of discovery and of, an artist who didn't receive the recognition in their lifetime, and which is not a new story either. But I think my uncle's story, there's definitely a comparison to that. And I feel like we are stepping into that momentum, and we are at the beginning. And, my goal is to present him in the best light. And so many times, and I know if anyone's listening who has an archive like I do, and I know that I'm a member of APAG, and there's a lot of people like me who've inherited these archives, and I have to make decisions and ask myself, what would he want me to do? And it's difficult. I was talking to Julian Sanders, the first Perry photo, and he said, he has obviously his grandfather's amazing collection and his gallery. And he said, at a certain point, you can't do that. You just have to start to make decisions, that you think are going to be the best for the work, because they're not here to tell you. So I'm starting to do that, but I'm always like, send me a sign. What do you want me to do?
It's a story about legacy, this, isn't it? It really underlines the importance of documentation. And I know that we step out each day with our cameras and we think, well, that's not worth documenting. It's all a bit too modern. One day it's going to be worth, if not a financial fortune, it's everything else that's attached to it is the fortune of being able to tap into a time, isn't it? It is a time capsule photography, and that's why it's so important to make photographs, and that's what Ernest did with his life, and what you've now got this amazing, it's a prize, isn't it? A wonderful prize.
It is. It's a treasure, and exactly what you said. And I think not only is it a capsule of a time, and certainly he was capturing a very iconic time in New York's history, but it's a vision of a time. And, people who carry cameras and have that eye, not everybody has that eye. And many of you photographers do. You're leaving, a vision that people can tap into emotionally, and it's nostalgia, but it's more than that. It's art, it's speaking for our shared experience of a time and place.
I wonder whether you thought this, and forgive me if it sounds crass and just a bit over romantic, but I'm a bit like that, a bit smushy in that way. But I do wonder whether when you stood in front of his pictures in Paris in that gallery, because there was a lot of it on the walls, whether you imagined for one moment standing there for one more time with Uncle Ernest, or Ernie, as you say, and what he might have said.
I mean, it was at the Grand Palais, which I still
amazing.
am blown away. Like next to Elliot Erwitt, across from some other amazing photographer, and
amazing.
It was insane. And and my aunt is a very big part of this story because it was not Ernie, it was Bernice and Ernie, and she would have loved this, and they would have loved it, and so I stood there and I just watched. I watched people looking at the work.
Oh, fantastic.
And that was the moment where I just said to him and her, oh my God, do you see this? Are you seeing this? I have to pray that, believe that somehow they knew it, and hopefully he wasn't saying, why'd you hang that there? Or whatever. These prints were posthumous prints, and I had Chuck Kelton, a master printer, worked on them, and he referenced the vintage prints, and I know he was saying the same thing while he was making the prints, asking Ernie, you want me to do this here, do that there. So yeah, I think energetically I have to believe, he's a part of this. I sure hope so. I mean, it's what he wanted. I want him to know that he's getting it, hopefully.
And my thanks to Melissa Berman for talking to me about her Uncle Ernie, Ernest Stone. And of course, I'll pop some pictures and links on the show page today so you can go and enjoy his work. Right, a few things. First up, if you're a Flickr user, let me guide you to a closed group Kelvin Brown has made. Inspired by this podcast, Kelvin has a closed group on Flickr encouraging you to share photographs that match the monthly assignments. The assignment coming up later on in the show, of course. And there's a link to that Flickr group on the show page. Do go and visit these show pages. There's lots and lots of links to get lost down various photographic rabbit holes with, or in rabbit warrens. And there's also pictures from those who send pictures into the show from the adventures they've been on photographically. There's always a pretty thorough show page, even with a video library as well, linked to some of the stuff that's discussed during our shows. I can't believe, too, that we're at the end of Feb. Did somebody press the gas pedal a little harder than usual for the start of this year? I'm sure somebody did. But I have some show news. This show, in a slightly different guise, started in 2020 in June, following that period of you-know-what. And we're still here in 2025, and it's in no small way down to our amazing patrons who are Extra Milers and MPB, who picked up that baton and placed a lot of trust in a podcast in the extremely, very early days. Podcasting is an interesting thing, and take that from somebody who worked in radio for many years. It's just, it's fantastic. If you'd have said to me years ago, working in radio when I started, that there will one day be a way to talk to people around the world in every single nook and cranny, and you wouldn't have to apply for a license, and it can be about whatever you want it to be about, programming that is, I'd have said, what? Have you been sniffing the mushrooms along the photo walk trek? Surely not. That cannot be true. But yeah, here we are. It's always been considered, in the main, I think, a free-to-air thing. There are 4.4 million podcasts out there, though 3.5 million, roughly, give or take, are actually active. That's a revolution, I would say, in terms of how and what people listen to, definitely. The majority of podcasts are still made out of, there's the metaphorical bedroom situation. That was the way that people thought about podcasts. And I've always thought podcasting, as a title, sometimes suffers a little bit from that association. So, yeah, the majority are still a one-man and his or her dog situation. I realise the irony in that. Barney's not here today. He's not here for a couple of weeks, actually, while all the specials go through, which I'll tell you about later on. And whilst we've stayed a constant, daily at first, during the tail end of the pandemic societal shutdowns, and now weekly for pretty much 5 years almost. That is a wondrous task. It is a labour of love sometimes, but it's a connection with the most incredible community, and I never forget that. So the show news, well, from the end of March, we say goodbye for the moment to MPB as our sponsor, and I'm so grateful for their unerring support all this time. It's been an absolute pleasure, a privilege to be associated with a brand that sees sustainability at the core of their business. There are many who throw sustainability around as a buzzword. We've talked about that, of course, on the podcast. But honestly, I've seen their operation. It truly is, and it comes all the way from the top, all the way filtering through every amazing person in their buildings in the UK and Europe and America. We'll be welcoming, I hope, some new supporters, either as product or financial support, or a bit of both, because it is a full-time job, this show. It's certainly not made out of a bedroom. But I have to say, it'll be the extra milers, our special extra milers, who will become, in many respects, our lifeline now. So it's almost like the baton has been passed, like a sort of coming of age, really. The show's found a core community who keep us here week after week. So thank you, MPB, from the bottom of my heart. And thank you in particular for your belief right from those early days. And thank you, looking ahead, to those who are, or hopefully are about to become extra milers. I'm hoping we have another 5 years at least to build our friendships even more.
What's there to hold in the light of this moon? My mind keeps searching, but my heart decides. Thoughts can be cruel, they're not mine to hold. The space unravels when you let go.
All right, to your letters. Bob of the Desert has fed back after our ghostly episode last week through the comments section of the page that we had last week for the show. Quite a few letters also of your experiences, and I'll be keeping hold of some of those because I want to read those in the weeks to come. But this one's a comment from Bob. And it had me find a chill. They're multiplying. Do I believe in ghosts? Asks Bob. No, but I probably should. Lots of friends with ghost stories. 2 that happened in my former home in Tucson. A house guest that heard a disembodied voice in the dark. And it was an old man at the foot of the bed. What, in your house? Did you invite me to your place in Tucson? Is there a Premier Inn locally that I can stay in instead? Oddly, these ghostly encounters were only experienced by women in our household. Perhaps I'm too thick to pick up on the energy. Oh, Bob. Another friend has first-hand accounts of ghostly activity in another hotel where he worked security. Thanks for the link to this hotel, Bob. I've popped that on my list of hotels never to stay at. By its history, if you go to the link. Shall I put the link on the show page? Yeah. Where he works security. But thank you for that. Anyway, says Bob, he saw a long dead worker sitting in the coffee shop at closing time, wearing his signature green plaid jacket. And the first room on the right had a rattling doorknob, an empty 6-pack of beer outside the door at 2:00. Yet there were no guests in the hotel at the time. My wife and I once saw a ghost in a shopping mall in Boston, or so we think. She sat upon a bench and tracked Robin with her eyes as we passed. Dressed in anachronistic garb, she sat amidst a crowd of family members who seemed completely unaware of her presence. We both had chills. Were they multiplying too? Cue the song. My theory, says Bob, stand by, Bob theory, is that ghosts or apparitions abound, but we only know they're ghosts if we're aware of their passing. Do I believe in ghosts? Well, I'll have to rethink. Bob, after what you've just said, what's in your house? Yes, you need to go back to the rethinking table. But some interesting stories. Thank you for them. They are fantastic. Obviously, Shannon Taggart's episode last week about spiritualism and photographing ghosts, or photographing spiritualism and seances. Obviously, that struck a nerve or struck a chord with some of you. So thank you for your letters. So to my second guest today. Now, I've known Lynn Fraser since the very start of this podcast. And Lynn, as you probably know, helps organise our Scottish retreats each year. And if all goes well, will be my right-hand shutter button, or whatever the phrase is, for the forthcoming 2026 adventure to Mongolia. And pictures from that adventure, well, she's had an adventure in Mongolia before, and others that she's made over the last decade appear within the panel sent in for the Amateur Photographer of the Year competition in the UK. Now, APOY, for short, Amateur Photographer of the Year, is the UK's most prestigious photography competition for amateur photographers. The competition has 10 rounds, each with a different theme, and the themes for 2024 were black and white, animal kingdom, city life, action, landscapes, people, macro, dusk to dawn, travel and open, which I guess is an anything goes one. Winning the ultimate prize of Amateur Photographer of the Year is an incredible feat. Oh, it is. Lynn's real travel story started in 2012, actually, on a charity bike ride from Ho Chi Minh to Angkor Wat with a Nikon 3100 strapped around her neck. I never know, how do you say the Nikon numbers? 3100? 3100? Anyway, she had that strapped around her, and every so often, like almost every few meters, I think, would stop to take pictures. And from there, and you need to go to Lynn's website to see the travel story really unfold, has led to where she is today. This, I think, is a wonderful story, a wonderful outcome, an award much deserved from a very, 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 very good friend of the show, and a personal friend to a good few of us in this community. Here's Lynn Fraser. Lynn, congratulations. Amateur Photographer of the Year 2024. I bow in your presence.
Thank you, Neil.
Is it a bit like a knighthood or something? Is there a medal? Is there not quite yet, obviously. As we talk, you won't have collected anything for it, will you? Apart from adulation from everybody.
No, I've won a £1,000 voucher to spend with the Camera Centre UK.
Yeah. Have you thought how you're going to spend that?
I've not given it a huge amount of thought at the moment, but I'm thinking along the lines of a lens for my camera. Well,
very well deserved. The images are fantastic. Well, first of all, let's explain how it works. But because if I were to be very, very honest, I didn't completely understand the way that it worked, because initially I thought you have a photograph that everybody fawns over and says wonderful, and like Press Photographer of the Year, it's all based on one, but it's not, is it? How does Amateur Photographer of the Year work?
It works across the whole year, essentially 10 months out of a 12-month period. So there are 10 individual competitions within the overall competition. Each month there is a different category, such as black and white, motion, travel, portraiture, landscape. They change from year to year.
So you don't know what's coming up then necessarily?
Well, you do. At the start of the year, they'll list all the categories that are going to come up through the year, and they give you the cut-off dates for entering and when the short list will go up and then when the results will go up. So each month there are set dates that you need to work to. At the start of the year, I looked at all the categories that were coming up and thought about what images I had that I could use for the different categories. And some of my images could be used in several of the categories, like travel and portraiture. So I had to decide which ones I thought would work best. So I did give it a little bit of thought.
Well, I'm sure you did. I had no doubt. How far back can you reach? I did recognise a few images in there from West Africa from last year.
Mm-hmm. Unlike some competitions, you can take out images from your archives. Travel Photographer of the Year, I think, specified that the images have to be taken within 2 years of submission. I was able to delve into the archive and pick out some that I took several years ago that I thought fitted a particular category.
Well, look, let's pick out one of the... before I do that, actually, in terms of winning an award, we do talk about this on the show from time to time, the importance of winning awards, what they mean, why you enter them. So why did you enter, first of all? What does it mean to you to be in a competition, eventually hoping to win it?
I never expect to win. I don't enter thinking I'm going to win. For me, it gets my images off the hard drive. It makes me look at them. And also, it's a great process to go through in terms of curation and trying to pick out what you think are the best images that will fit a particular category or the specification that the judges have given. So I use it really, for me, as a learning process.
Right, let's talk about the photograph that got you the most amount of points that helped you along the way to win. And it's worth pointing out the numbers, actually. 2,200 photographers, 12,000 entry pictures. And for you to be at the top of that, number one out of 2,200, is absolutely fantastic. So the photograph that got you the most amount of points is the one I'm looking at here, which we'll share on the show page. But talk me through this particular photograph. It's amazing. How you went back with a clean camera after this, I don't know.
I didn't really. I spent quite a lot of time dusting my camera in the 3 days that we spent out with the Mundari in South Sudan. So that's where that picture was taken, at a Mundari cattle camp. Yeah. And that's a tribe in South Sudan who are very famous for their cattle, very large cattle with large horns, the Ankoli Watusi cattle. And we camped alongside the cattle camp. So we had 3 days there. And we were able just to wander very freely around the camp. Wow. And that particular image was taken fairly early in the morning. They started quite early, obviously, with the heat and moving the cattle to their grazing grounds for the day. The young ladies that I'd photographed had already prepared coffee for the men of the tribe. They have very, very sweet, gingery coffee. Ooh. And then they went off to do their chores. And I just happened to turn around as I was walking through the camp and thought, oh, that looks lovely. Lifted the camera and took a picture.
Well, on my sheet of questions here, I have the question: was there a storytelling compositional decision behind this picture? But it really was reactionary more than that, wasn't it?
A lot of my photography is reactionary, but I remember thinking, oh, that looks lovely, and lifting the camera. I think I just went, oh. Yeah. It just looks so atmospheric with the smoke and the dust that you've already referred to.
Well, there's so much going on in it, isn't there? There's somebody at the back scratching their head. There's the cattle. They're slightly overlapping, but there's no heads that are over other heads. It's an extraordinarily busy photograph, isn't it? Now, I wonder whether that's what caught people's eyes, that there's a real story going on within it.
I think so, and also I think it's something that we don't tend to see as well. Obviously, it's taken somewhere that a lot of people don't or won't travel to. And a lot of people have said some of the scenes that I've taken within the cattle camp look almost biblical. In terms of the activity and the animals. I mean, I suppose to us it all looks very basic, but it was a very well-oiled machine. Everybody had different jobs and chores to do. The whole camp was manned by young adults, I suppose probably under 30, and older children. And everybody had a role to play, even the children. And when we were walking around photographing, if some of the older folks thought that the children were taking too long posing for us, they got shouted at to get back to their chores.
It's interesting that Nigel Atherton, who's with Amateur Photographer, in his quote said you'd avoided the most common travel cliches by visiting off-the-beaten-track places, and your portraits of the people you met were made with skill and sensitivity. And you referred to it as well there, off the beaten track. This is not a country people decide to go to. It does have its political problems in not necessarily exactly where you were, but it's not that far away. And I'm intrigued as to why you decided to travel here.
Because I wanted to.
So there are considerations. I mean, there are. I'd like to go to certain places in Russia right now, but I wouldn't go. But it's on my because I want to list. But there has to be a bit more decision making than that in it, surely.
Yes, I travelled with Trevor Cole, who runs Alternative Visions, and he came with a personal recommendation from somebody that I know, and I spoke to him on the telephone. I think actually after I'd booked it, I maybe should have done it the other way around, but I did speak to him on the telephone, and he assured me that the country was perfectly safe, and he'd been travelling there for quite a few years, despite the Foreign Office. If you go onto the Foreign Office website, which we tend to use in the UK to get travel advice, it's a red listed country and they say not to go. But he said, no, it was absolutely safe. And if that changed, we wouldn't go. We used local guides on the ground, so they looked after us the whole time. There were certain things that we could and couldn't do. We had to send in a list of all our equipment when we applied for our visa, and it was checked when we arrived at Juba Airport. Yes, we were taken aside with the camera bag. Obviously, there was a language barrier, but the lady went through the list and she pointed at the list and I pointed in the camera bag and we went through everything so that she was satisfied. We weren't allowed to photograph in Juba because you needed a specific license for that, and we weren't staying in Juba very long, so we didn't get a license for that. We weren't allowed to photograph at checkpoints, which I forgot about one day, and I took a picture with my phone out of the vehicle window and I got an absolute dressing down by one of the guards at the checkpoint. He was all right in the end, and I deleted the photo and apologised profusely. But I was also told off by Trevor as well, nicely.
Actually, that goes hand in glove really for the next question. I was going to ask, what are the biggest challenges in capturing moments like this extraordinary picture? Are there cultural barriers? Are there no-nos? It sounds like you were given just this privilege of being able to wander this fantastical scene.
We had permission. When we arrived at the camp, we were not allowed to pick up our cameras until Trevor and our local guide had met with the chief. There were two chiefs in that particular camp. There were two camps joined together. And until they'd met with them and made sure that the permission was still in place, we didn't take any photographs.
Right. So there are respects and ethics rules, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And even though we had permission from the chief to wander around the camp and take photographs, it was just polite to ask people if they were happy to have their photographs taken. And you just do it by waving your camera and, a smile and a gesture. It goes a long way.
Yeah. Did you know when you made this photograph that you had something special?
Yeah, I did like it. There were some images that I took when I saw them in the back of the camera, and then on the screen I thought, and then Trevor also said he thought it was a very good image.
Yeah.
So.
Next picture. I love this portrait. Lady with lemons on her head would be a rather sort of brusque way of describing it. It's a beautifully, whereas the picture we've just talked about has muted tones, this is full on colour, isn't it? Tell me about her and tell me about why she's wearing what she's wearing.
That was taken on the same trip. So I went from South Sudan to do a second trip in Ethiopia, again with Trevor. And this was taken in the Omo Valley, and it's a lady who is part of the Suri tribe. Now, that tribe is really well known for its body painting and its face painting.
Yeah, extraordinary.
And that is traditional, but in the last 25 years, because there are more and more photographers going to the region, the children and the ladies and girls have started creating these amazing headdresses. Because the way it works in Ethiopia is that everybody who is photographed gets paid. And this was something that was actually set up by Ethiopian tourist guides. It's not something that visiting tourists have done. So they all compete with each other to have their photographs taken. So they get quite outlandish in terms of the headdresses that they make and the patterns that they put on their faces. As soon as we arrived at where we were camping, they all appeared virtually out of nowhere, it seemed, and they all sat in the shade and they had little mirrors, and some of them painted their own faces, or they worked in pairs and painted each other, because for them this was an opportunity to earn some money.
Does that then become awkward insofar as you are making a selection of the person that particularly appeals to, because it's a very subjective thing, isn't it, this? And I'm sure there will be some people that weren't necessarily selected by the photographers as a portrait.
Yes, it was a process that I was extremely uncomfortable with, just for that reason, that I felt it almost had the feeling of a cattle market, that you were choosing people, and I felt really uncomfortable because obviously some people are more photographically aesthetic than others. So I stopped choosing people and I just followed Trevor. And photographed the people that he photographed.
That sounds like a cop-out to me.
Oh, absolutely. It was a complete cop-out. And I really, even by the end of that trip, I still couldn't point at somebody and say, I want to photograph you.
It's a striking portrait. The colours really pop out of it, especially the lemons and those big, huge yellows. It's beautiful. In terms of the background, it all gets swallowed into a black background, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Tell me how that technically works and what you did. Did you pop any flash in here?
No, but we did have a black cloth.
Right. Okay.
She was standing in front of a black cloth. But we did use reflectors for quite a lot of the portraits.
Did you? Is that worth taking? When you're making pictures like this, you would suggest taking a small reflector with you? Do you carry one now?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, Trevor had one with them, and I think a couple of other people who'd been on that sort of trip before had taken reflectors too. And the guides were brilliant. They got very adept at using reflector.
So there's a black background on the next photograph as well. There's 4 photographs in all. This is the third of those that we're talking about within our conversation. This is an absolutely beautiful black and white portrait. It's phenomenal for just the intensity of it. And she looked away in this photograph. I'd like you to tell me about her, the tribe she belongs to, the markings on her as well, and the direction perhaps as she looks away.
This was taken at the same time as the lady with the yellow fruit on her head. So she's a Suri woman as well. But she'd chosen not to paint her face. And I think that's what attracted me to her. She's wearing one of her big traditional earrings in her ear. And the markings that you're referring to is their traditional scarification that they do. So they cut themselves and then put soot, ash, dirt into the cuts. So they become rays that are colloidal scars, and they're cut into different patterns. We saw some women with their whole backs covered and their arms. They do it on their she's got some on her cheek as well. And
in terms of the direction as she looks, because I think that makes the photograph, you know.
I think I was just trying different things, and it was to show her earring and the scarification on her cheek and her arm. And
were you able to have much communication aside from that?
Not really, no. They were very good because they're so used to photographers being out there. You could point and ask them to face a direction or to look at you, or to maybe close their mouth or something like that.
Moving on to, I know you have a penchant for wonky telegraph poles. I don't know from where this has come, but it's something that is on your radar, isn't it? And this is, I sense this must be in Scotland.
It is, yeah. It's on the Isle of Lewis, and they get some quite horrendous winds up there. So I just like the way they were leaning. I presume it's the wind and the wet ground that they're in, and a combination of that has maybe added to the tilt.
It's almost like somebody's leant on one and they've all started to go.
Yes, it's like they've just said, "Oh, I've had enough of this standing up straight. I want to lie down."
Yeah, it's a really interesting landscape picture, because you can think of landscape I think you can think of it in a very one-dimensional way. When you think, right, I need a big vista, a massive mountain, perhaps a cap of snow would be really nice. This is not that at all, is it? It's human observation of something that's, well, very human.
Yeah, I think I'm coming to realise that I'm not that taken with pure landscape. For me, I actually prefer man-made objects in the image. Just it gives it a bit more interest. It's something that I'm interested in: buildings, old buildings, remains of buildings, telegraph poles.
Wonky ones if possible.
Wonky ones especially.
Yeah. Camera equipment-wise, what did you use for these?
I think most of them were probably taken on... The 4 that we were talking about were definitely taken on my Canon 5D Mark IV. Yeah. Some of the ones from Gambia that were shortlisted were taken on the R5.
In terms of what it means for you now, you've won this fantastic award. Well done. Congratulations. top of 2,200 people, thank you very much. What's next? What does this mean for you? What does the award do for you? How are you going to... I don't want to use the L word, but I'm going to very clumsily use the leverage word. How do you leverage this success?
Answers on a postcard, please.
I thought you might say that. But winning an award, I mean, it's a precious thing, isn't it?
It is. It's absolutely fantastic, and it really is quite a highlight in what I would call my photographic journey, because it's only really the last 10 years or so that I've really taken it more seriously.
Amazing, yeah.
and done all the travelling that I've done. And I have been reminded by somebody whose opinion I do very much value, just to remember that it is only a highlight in my photographic career, and it doesn't define me as a photographer, and not to put any pressure on myself or any perceived pressure that I now have something that I've got to live up to. I just need to go out and continue to photograph in the way that I photograph, and maybe try and decide to do something a bit more with my images rather than them just sitting on the hard drive.
Well, you might well be asked by people now to give advice to other amateur photographers who dream of capturing impactful images. You will have to be ready for questions like that. You say you've been doing it 10 years. It's been a learning process all the way along. But what advice would you give?
Just to go out and enjoy it, and just do what pleases you. Yeah. You can take a certain amount of advice, obviously, to start with the technicalities, but then I think it's just go out and play. Just see what lights your fire.
And my thanks and congratulations to Lynn Fraser, an award richly deserved. It's the photo walk of a Friday. Me with your letters, you with your cameras. I've got my camera with me as well. I've not made any sketchbook pictures today. Just so much going on in the show. And there's pictures to share on the show page today. So I tell you what, I'll be making a lot of photographs over the next few weeks with our Indian adventure. I'll be sharing a good few of those sketchbook pictures, I'm absolutely sure. If you'd like to write into the show with the stories of where you've been photographing, I would love to hear from you. The email address is stories@photowalk.show. stories@photowalk.show. So the next 3 weeks, I have a series of specials whilst part of it is spent on adventure. Funnily enough, Lynn's there on that one as well. I sense it's going to get quite competitive now. I'll be keeping a close eye on what Lynn sees. Anyway, the next 3 weeks of the show. Now, I've just finished editing next week's show, which is an extraordinary tale of somebody who, on the face of it, is like you and I, except Tim Kinkton decided one day to go climb Mount Everest. As you do, you know. Start off with coffee, answer a few emails, take the dog for a walk, then think, what shall I do this afternoon? Oh, I know. I'll start training to summit the world's highest peak, in between shopping for tea and watching Netflix. It's an incredible story. It really is. There's abject horror mixed with a complete inspiration. You'll understand what I mean by that when you hear next week's show.
Yeah, the helicopter can't get. We can strip the aircraft down, but we just cannot get to you. So it basically, if you have an accident above Camp 3, you're probably not coming back from that. I've done this very selfish thing, you know, where I've taken this time off work and I've spent all this money and I've trained all this time, and now I have a duty to go home. But the descent is pretty scary. If anyone thinks climbing Everest is easy, try coming back down again.
Week after Tim, we have Mark Seymour, a friend of mine actually. I go for a walk with Mark. We spent a bit of time in his house as well, looking at photo books and photographs on a wall, because it was bitter, I can tell you. We don't take a lot of photos on our photo walk, but we do get to talking about his life behind a lens, making the most incredible stories, including one particular very personal one.
It come about through love. It didn't come about by me saying, I'm going to do this project. It wasn't something that I set out to do any of this stuff. It was just photographing my dad. If I couldn't do this, I don't know what I would be doing. I certainly wouldn't have had the richness in my life of being able to photograph the people and the places.
And then the third week, a documentary photographer I've been wanting to talk to for a long, long time now, who's made it his life's work to document the north of England, Ian Beasley. I have a good few of his books, actually, on my shelves.
Yeah, the 70s was a really interesting decade. And the Office of National Statistics have said that it's the most equal decade that there's been in the 20th century, when there was more social mobility than any other time, which was to my advantage. I went to art college, and you really got the feeling that you could actually, you could pursue this profession. Though when the 80s it really did get very, very difficult.
So some super shows to come. Then, of course, we have our big Indian edition as well that'll be coming up. Anyway, let's not forget this as well. The one-word assignments. They're going to be a constant during these weeks. Here comes your challenge for this month.
The photo walk assignment.
A one-word assignment. I am amazed that we have not had this word before.
I'm amazed too, because particularly with portraiture, I'm going to have to say eyes. Because
eyes.
It's everything. I mean, that's the connection in the photograph. Obviously, people can take that a whole lot of different ways. The obvious way is, through the connection of eyes in a portrait. But let's see what people, what other roads people go down with that.
So, best of luck. Send your pictures to stories@photowalk.show. If you can, as I always request, try and resize them to 2,500 pixels. Otherwise, don't worry, send it full res, and I'll do the heavy lifting for you. No watermarks, no borders, but do include links to your social feed, your website, your Flickr, your Glass. If you can put the whole URL, that does make it slightly easier. But wherever we can enjoy more of your work, send me a link so that I can send our community to go and have a good look through your portfolios. Also, send me any thoughts about the picture if you think that helps with the storytelling. All the pictures and stories will go on the assignments page, and some of the pictures will also feature on our Photo Walk Instagram, which helps our community grow and hopefully will put some more eyes on your work as well. So, to my final guest today, a professional documentary film photographer living in one of the most beautiful areas of the UK, Cornwall. Cornwall, by the way, is almost its own country. I'm never sure whether they've been truly serious about this. I suspect they probably are, actually. There is a movement, with a small m, I think, to make it an independent country, Cornwall. Do you know, it's probably a story that we should probably follow up at, probably follow up at some stage. But it's a beautiful place. I spent many, many happy holidays there with my mum and dad. Oh, I absolutely adore the place. Rick deals solely, Rick Davy this is, in film. Do not put a digi near him. He breaks out in hives. This project, though, A Day in the Life of A, really captured my eye when I was introduced to it. It's a visually documented look at individuals who live and work by the Cornish coast. And I think there is much inspiration in this piece, because it really does prove that the community around you is very special. This is Rick Davy. Rick, from the outside, you have... I often say this, and you're going to be the next in a long line of people I say this to, I'm sure. But you are living my dream. You have a beautiful house on the Cornish coast. It doesn't get much better, does it?
There's an amount of people that will always say you're lucky to live where you live. And I say there's no luck. We made that choice to come and live here. And it's a great place, to bring... I brought my family up here. One of my girls is now Cornish through and through. We've been here 23 years. There isn't another place, mainland Britain, that I would like to live in, and I'm quite happy here.
A Day in the Life is what we're talking about. I think it's a wonderful project. And you dropped me a message about it, and I think I sort of persuaded you into having a little chat here about it rather than just mentioning it on the show, because I think it's a great project and proof that gold is on our doorstep. And these people that you meet, you're like a Cornish Revilius to me. He of course was North Devon, wasn't he? Revilius. You're Cornwall. So tell me about the project and why you started doing it and what the purpose to it was.
Well, initially I was looking for another project to get my teeth into. I'd done some books, I'd done some other projects, and my mind keeps ticking over constantly about what new projects I could bring to perhaps the social word or onto the internet. And it just got me thinking about all those creative individuals that live within Cornwall. You know, I just started to put things together. Gradually, they started to manifest themselves. As I shot one, I shot another. Big introductions to other people, which were great. And it just seemed to snowball from there. I would like to point out at this stage that it was never a monetary valued platform. It's always been about my love for shooting film photography. It did start initially in a digital aspect, but it just didn't have the same impetus for me. Didn't have the same depth, contrast, grain, and that was how it really started. And probably around about 3.5 years, I reckon it's been running now.
Because actually, you're a professional photographer who shoots film anyway, documentary film photography, and that there can't be a lot of you about.
I think if you put that into Google, the vast majority of what you'll get up, 99% of that is wedding. And it's all about that SEOing, isn't it? Documentary photographer, Cornwall. I've always put documentary film photographer, Cornwall, or 35mm or medium format. And I'm always there on the first page, but there's this host of wedding photographers that surround me. So I think I am, to a degree, slightly unique in that aspect. But I think they're still out there.
Are you a purist documentary photographer in that respect?
I love to engage with my subjects. Portrait is, out of all the aspects of it, portrait is something that I've got this real love of, because I think you get the better portrait out of anybody if you've engaged with them for, say, in conversation. The shoulders drop, they're a bit more relaxed, you've got a one-to-one relationship, and then open your shutter. You get a much, much better portrait, I think.
So that's interesting, because in terms of documentary, the purists would say, well, Rick, that's not pure documentary. Documentary is hiding in the bush, acting like a ninja.
Well, there's elements of street photography there as well, isn't there? Because you're waiting for something, or we photographers see things that others don't we? And street photography is an example of that. You'll open your shutter just as you see something that's a little bit different, and capture that. And documentary, to a degree, is like that. Admittedly, within the project, there are, I would say, not staged photographs, but photographs that I would use for a day in the life of collectively. I'm not going to share my 8 or 10 hours of a day with that one particular individual, but what we try to do is encompass what they might do within that day.
Okay, well, let's talk about the project. It's a day in the life of, and then there's another letter, A.
And then the A starts again with a knife smith, a gunsmith, a decorative ceramist, depending on who I'm documenting.
Who started the whole thing off? Who was your first subject?
It was a day in the life of a surfboard shaper.
Very cool, yeah. As a surfboard shaper.
Instead of you going out to buy a surfboard off the net and have it delivered to you, this individual will make a surfboard for your needs by hand to your specification.
So I've got that project in front of me. He looks like he lives the idyllic life as well, by the way, and a nice fancy shack by the sea, which looks very nice. And tell me about him. And
he's a lovely guy. I met him some years ago on another project when I was doing some skateboarding stuff. And Tim is a lovely guy. He's the most photogenic guy. The minute you put a camera at him, he's just natural. There's nothing about waiting for that time, like I say, about chatting away to your subject and the shoulders drop. Just stick a camera in his face and he's done. He's such a nice guy.
The people that you meet then, have you been introduced to them by each of... It sounds like there's been a little bit of introductory stuff going along where people have said, oh, you really need to talk to Bob.
Exactly that. And that's how it's escalated, really. There's been a period of, let's say, 4 or 5 months where I hadn't shot an awful lot, and I thought I'll do a little bit of research and see what other creatives we got out there. There are still a few that avoid me, that I just can't quite pick up on. I want the old boy that's building that classic Cornish boat, but as yet I haven't got him.
One of the ones that's really captured me photographically is the silversmith. It's her studio, isn't it? That's the caravan.
She lives on a set of buildings which is left of the picture. You can see the main picture there, but she works out of this I should say, battered caravan. It's got a lovely little studio, and she can go away there, and it's peace and quiet, and she can concentrate. And she's another really interesting character, very natural. And it's so lovely to capture, and being able to, being asked to, or being invited, I should say, into their world, it's really quite humbling.
There's some very specialist characters in there as well, aren't there? A Spanish guitar maker.
Now, he's another character. Again, I envisaged in the back of my mind that it was some sort of little shed in the back of a garden somewhere, and he got a dim light and there was a lot of cobwebs. But far from it, he'd had this sort of small industrial unit building these fabulous guitars, all by hand. And just the process of it's mind-blowing.
In terms of when you approach them, are they surprised that you've approached them out the blue, and are they happy to be photographed?
I've tried to go through another medium or an introduction, because that way I think it makes it a little bit more relaxed. But some of them are just really ecstatic about it. So really, you'd really like to shoot something about, my little world. Any creatives or any designers out there that have got something to show and something to share, isn't it a great way of documenting them?
See, this is what's really inspiring me, actually, Rick, because this idea of people being on your doorstep that you can photograph, that would actually be really quite flattered to be approached. I notice in the photographs that you make, so there seems to be a hero image, and then there's a series of pictures which might show them at work. There might be close-ups of the things that they craft. Do you go in with a formatted plan at all?
I have a chat to them beforehand, and some of them occasionally send me a few photos of their workshop, which gives me a really, really good insight into what they're doing. Not only that, it shows me light levels. And you and I know with film, it's a little bit more sensitive, isn't it, to digital? And I don't use flash, I don't use lights. So I have to rely on, my light meters, and by having a pre-recce is really helpful.
Who's been the most eccentric? And I asked that a little bit guardedly, but we are in England.
Eclectic-wise, the funeral director was quite an interesting one. Now, there's a gentleman which is a family-owned business all the way through, and he has this I remember he had this beautiful picture of his father. Must have been about 4 foot by 5 foot within the funeral business. And as you walk up the stairs, you're sort of looking and engaging with this guy. And I shot him next to his dad, which his dad had passed away, sadly. But it was just a beautiful thing to have within that. I mean, we all stereotype funeral directors as being very black and Victorian and very sort of stiff upper lip, if you like. But it wasn't. It was a lovely, relaxed atmosphere. And we had a good laugh.
The beekeeper, I have a soft spot for beekeepers, actually. I've photographed a few across the years, and you've photographed one of them. I managed to get myself stung on a few occasions when I've been photographing the beekeepers. As much as he says, hey, you're fine, just come in. But you are a nation of harvesters, as you say, in the Southwest. So beekeepers, I'm not surprised to see one in there. What was your experience of that? I love beekeeping.
Utterly fantastic. First of all, she's got 76 hives. She dots them at various places in and around within a 10-mile radius of where she lives. And the astonishing thing about that is she can tell the difference of the honey by where those bees have been feeding. And I went into her kitchen and she had these industrial plastic containers, tons and tons of honey. And as I walked in, I just got sticky feet, and everything was, you pick something up and it gets stuck to you and you put it down. And it was all quite comical. It was like a 1950s black and white movie when you walked in. But she was a lovely lady, very engaging, very professional, and highly experienced.
She also said, whenever I put my white suit on to tend the bees, I never seem to be in demand from the family. It seems to be a good way to get away from everybody. On that note, by the way, you do a write-up. So is there some sort of interview process as you're going along?
So what generally I do, when I get to speak to them first and foremost before the visit, I just ask them very briefly about what's going on. And then I go over, shoot them. It takes about an hour generally. I like to spend about an hour with them. And then I send them a list of questions. Now, I also say to them, I have asked what you do, but once I get behind the camera, I think I just go into film brain and I forget most of the stuff that they told me. So I do apologise to them and say if I had to reiterate on what's gone in, please don't be offended. So I set out a list of questions, get those back, and then try to make each story different. But 83 times, it's getting a bit of a challenge. I'm on to number 84, hopefully next week or the week after.
How long have you been shooting it, Rick?
Maybe 3.5, 4 years it's coming up now. But there was never a time frame on it. I never knew whether it would explode in the way it did. There's never been an end date, and there never will be. As long as I can continue to find those creatives, those unique individuals, those people of interest that live and work within the Cornish coast, I'll continue to shoot.
Is it something you wish you'd started much, much earlier?
In terms of the digital aspect, yes, because I did shoot a few first ones on it. And when I look back at that content, I do criticise my work heavily. I know I can get better every day I shoot. And I don't know everything about photography. I never will. But I am very, very critical about every time I shoot. And I think that's a good way to an extent, because how would you better yourself if you're not critical about the last shot you took?
I'm wondering as well whether you've built a sort of larger friends and acquaintances circle through doing it, because you've met some incredible people here.
I still see a few of them round and about. We still have a chat. There was a guy, a very famous potter down here, but I see him from time to time, and he's a big Leica lover. So we always have a good chat about glass and Leica. He has this thing called an anagama kiln, and it's a Japanese kiln where he fires his pottery. It's a huge, huge thing. It looks incredibly dangerous in the back of his garden, but it takes 24 hours to fire, and it has to get up to 1,200 degrees before he can start to fire. And he puts all his pots in. On that occasion, when I saw him, was about 300 different pots, and has this particular style that he works towards. He's been doing it for probably 40 to 50 years now. I see him quite regularly, going back to what you're saying there. I see some of these people, and it's lovely to engage back with them again.
So at the moment, the project is on the website. What are the plans to? Because this feels to me like an obvious exhibition. I don't know how far you travel for each of these. Cornwall is not the smallest county in the world, and some of it's a bit difficult to get to.
Well, if you look at the county line, that's where I end. I won't go outside of that, because that changes the premise of the project. It's about Cornish lives and people who live and work by the coast. I'll travel anywhere within Cornwall. I know it very well now. In terms of an exhibition, I did look towards putting it into a book, but with such massive content, it would be incredibly a longevity project, I think. I did engage socially for a while, but I became very disheartened with the likes of Instagram, etc., which, as you and I know, when in the first instance, it was all about photography and photographers. Now it's so far removed from that, the content doesn't interest me anymore. So I moved away from the social aspect and really just promote it through my own website and through the website that I have here.
I think this is so inspirational, and the most inspirational thing to it is that it just proves that magic is on our doorstep. That these wonderful portrait projects, you can find the most incredibly wonderful people. There's more good people around in this world than there ever are bad. And this is a project that reminds you of that. And I wonder if you've got any advice for anybody thinking, I quite like this idea. How do I go about starting?
I mean, with any project, you get those ideas in the back of your head, and then you have a little look online, you go, oh, somebody's covered it. But I think the best thing to look at it, or a way of perhaps reanalyzing it, is that's the way somebody's done it. Why don't you try a slightly different angle on that? And I think that's sort of what I'd say to somebody. If they're looking towards a project, don't necessarily think, well, I'm going to take my camera out and shoot buildings. Think about maybe moving it slightly to another side and thinking about the architectural content maybe of it, or moving away towards that. That's the way I looked at this. There's loads of projects out there, and everybody seems to have done everything. All I've done really in this one is just make it a little bit more geographical and kept it as Cornish.
And my sincere thanks to Rick Davy and all my guests today. An honour and a privilege. And there'll be links, of course, on the show page to pictures and things that we've discussed. And that's it for today. If you can't wait until next Friday and would like to walk a little further together, then the Extra Mile edition number 128 is waiting for you. It's our extra show for those who support this podcast through Patreon. You go the extra mile for me, so I go the extra mile for you. We've got so so many shows now available, and before The Extra Mile, there was a different series of other shows. So if you are an extra miler, do go back and listen to all the other episodes called More. There was a diary series that I had as well. There's some archived interviews in there. Oh, there's lots and lots of stuff. Plus, you get a chance to join in with our Zoom every single month, our live shows. And maybe this will be news for another week, but I'll also be introducing some workshops into the group as well. This week, my guest on The Extra Mile, though, is a photojournalist called Martine Perret. She is a French-Australian photographer known for her striking aerial landscapes and documentary work. With a background in photojournalism, she's covered UN peacekeeping missions and later focused on capturing Australia's remote landscapes and indigenous communities.
On this week's Extra Mile.
So when my girlfriend picked me up from Bujumbura airport, we went to this really dodgy kind of dicey hotel, and then all of a sudden I heard some noise and I could see in the hills, she said, that's nothing, that's just a trace of bullets. Every night there's fireworks in the sky, and I was like, oh, okay, welcome to Bujumbura.
The Extra Mile is always special, but I think you'll like today's a lot. You can join the community by going to the website, photowalk.show, and hitting the Support the Show button. And if you do support us, you can either do it as a monthly thing, or you can take a year. You can take a year out these days, and a lot of people actually do it that way. Our PS to the show is to come, but before that, we need a play-out song, just to make some final frames to or think about what's been said today, and it's from Chameleon Treat. Love that name. It's called The Sun and the Earth, and when I first heard this, I thought, it's a bit trippy. But then I listened to it on a walk last weekend while making some pictures along the path, and I actually found it quite meditative. So here is Chameleon Treat.
It wouldn't palisade till the planets all start spinning in reverse. On the comfort in a shattered universe. Still be with you when the sun destroys thee.
Fabulous. I do love that. That's Chameleon Treat. Just a few closing thoughts before the PS. My sincere thanks to you if you are or you're about to become an extra miler. We'll keep building this wonderful community of kindness in the photographic and walking world together. A safe place to share our thoughts about this thing we do, photographing and walking. My thanks to Neil Ford, who looks after IT, Andrea Gilpin, who shares her time with us to look after Instagram, Kelly Mitchell, who looks after our Facebook members, along with additional research from Michael Mixon. Write a postscript for the show, a PS. Today it's from John Berger, who was an English art critic, a writer and a thinker, best known for Ways of Seeing, from 1972, when I was very much still in short trousers, which reshaped how we understand art and photography. And in a show where we've talked about the fascination we have for the world through the lens and the people within it, I thought this would probably make a good PS. John said, "When we read a story, we inhabit it. The covers of the book are like a roof and four walls, but when a photograph is framed, it's not a confinement, it's a window."
The Photo Walk is a Loading Zone production.